The characteristic of the Bari stereophotogrammetric section was due to the fact, for the most unique and rare era, that photogrammetry was in the hands of architecture teachers. And, for the first time, there were no topographers operating in the photogrammetric survey. The return device was a universal returner. The autograph while A2 universal because it could return frames taken with the optical axis oriented anyway. This restituta received the plates in two baskets, with objectives equal to those of the camera adopted in the shot, that could be oriented to create the same situation existing at the time of recovery. The drawing, which we see, is the relief of the prospect of the castle of Conversano. In my opinion, in all my experience, it is the only restitution made in a workmanlike manner. I say in a workmanlike manner, because it was really aimed in the sense that Professor De Vita, who was responsible for the survey, stood at the drawing board, with a photographic enlargement of the elevation. And I, to the restituta, provided the indications which, little by little, he asked for the reconstruction of the prospect. We never forget that the relief is a real project. A redesign of the work which in the restoration sector is indispensable. If a restorer fails to rebuild the work on which it must intervene, it is not known what it can do. When it has educational purposes, the relief makes culture. Drawing a bow, without understanding how the bow works, is wasted time. Without saying that if the ashlar is not designed in the right way, and it is done so that you can slip off, so he did not draw the bow. Let's not forget that drawing means writing, communicating something, and must communicate something real. Returning to the prospect, in some areas it was covered with trees, so it was necessary to integrate the photogrammetric survey with measurements or manuals or taken from photographs. Another experience, interesting enough, at least as far as I'm concerned, was the relief of the elevations of the Cathedral of Altamura. Bearing in mind that in the P30 the target that could then be tilted further down, it was really a problem to make that survey. In fact, you see that, for the resumption of the bell towers, the shots from above were made with different inclinations from an attic. No windows, so there were openings in the masonry to be able to shoot. Another shot was taken from a balcony, and another shot was taken from the street. And if you notice the two frames, you realize that in one the road appears dry, while in the other the road is wet. This gives you an idea of the time required for the recovery operation. In fact, the recovery with the sun had started. Then came a downpour of rain, and rather than throwing away work, we preferred to continue working underwater. Apart from the fact that, in stereoscopic vision, there was a certain annoyance seeing simultaneously two different aspects of the road. However, it was operated in this way. The side elevation was taken over by a terrace, and therefore it was quite easy to place the photodiodolite. Another shot was from a balcony. Notice the umbrella open, not because of the rain, but to protect the instrument, which had levels, from the sun's rays. And there was a risk of distorting the leveling. The return was resolved with two designs that you see, both for the main elevation than for the side one. The drawings were obtained with the autograph, and then polished by hand, integrated with information obtained from photographs or with manual surveys. At the time it was unthinkable to speak, rather it was forbidden to speak of scale prints. The official excuse was that photography could not be passed on to heliographic copies. But this was done after a short time. Even if the heliographic exposure took a long time. And the photograph was printed on a transparent support. But above all, the camera was accused of deforming the images. Those famous deformations, which we'll talk about later. Which however could be easily corrected by those who developed the photographs. In fact, I made the whole prospect of the castle of Bari. With a series of enlarged frames and polished, but nobody knew about it. But I was able to distinguish between new and old segments. And redesigned everything when on the prospect. As for filming already we began to resort only to the normal case. And this is very important because we have already seen about stereophotography. The P30 was almost ideal for the normal case. The machine was pointed at the object. And the telescope of theodolite rotated 90 degrees. Aimed at the aim, placed on the second tripod. Thus ensuring the orthogonality of the optical axis to the recovery base. On the screen we see the Ristuada A40. Accepted the plates of the double room. We will notice a big difference to place the slabs in the Restituta A2. Where it took at least 20 minutes, in addition to the recovery which was very long. While with the other type of Restituta, once calibrated, just insert the plates. But we will see this later. I believe that the only problem of photogrammetry, perhaps unsolvable at least for now, is given by the client. Basically when you request relief, the relief of the facade is required, the relief of this building. It never specifies what to do, what to detect. As long as the relief was manual or in any case topographical, by points. And because time was what it was. And therefore the information could not be very high. Perhaps the request for plans, elevations and sections was acceptable. How much instead the operator, the restitutist, has a model, of which he can communicate any type of information. It is clear that he falls into a big indecision. I personally experienced it as an operator. More than as a user this problem. Here we see block 49 of Bari Vecchia. I remember that at the time, I was trying to make different types of refunds. Note only the volumes shown with the voids of the windows. On another table there were the appeals of the bricks. And then I tried to bring everything back, brick by brick. But it is clear that, gradually, that information increases, the drawing becomes more and more illegible. On the other hand, showing a sort of catalog, the user asks for the one most loaded with information. Now apart from the costs which clearly increase with the return times, I just want to say that if I have to retrace, brick by brick, a whole elevation, the times are certainly superior, but the information comes confused. We have already seen the prospect of the detail of the portal of the Basilica of San Nicola. It was all there, but you did not understand what you wanted to highlight. I would say, nothing. And so, however, at the time I fell into the trap of reporting as much information as possible. And we arrived at the relief of the castle of Gioia del Colle, where, in essence, the walls of the towers were flat. The elevation was quite flat, there were no big protrusions. However, in that case a stereophotogrammetric survey was made. There were many details, which incentivized to make small experiments. For example the photototeodolite P30 in addition to them. Therefore with low sensitivity, they were plates of 13 din of 6 din. Which required, in full sun, a fairly long exposure time. In addition, the chamber also had a yellow filter, which still required an increase in exposure. It was easy to reach half a minute, in full sun. And if we see the detail of the relief, at street level, of the prospect of the castle, the exposure time should have been 5 minutes. But the exposure has been specially extended, with greater closure of the diaphragm. Because people passed and so I was forced to put a black card in front of the lens. When can someone and remove it when the ground was clear? The photograph came as if there was nobody. As if it were a deserted road. Instead there was traffic. Beyond that made a couple of shots for every detail. Because, I repeat again, the phototheodolite had a rather limited shooting angle. There have been several stations and to coordinate these stations with the topographical triangulation, reference points were detected. In this case, 60 reference points were reached. Bearing in mind that for each point we made a double reading for each station. At least to reduce errors, with a straight telescope with an inverted telescope. So from 60 it came to 120 points. Plus another 120 we are 240 points. If you notice on the card there is the writing strong wind. So on the terrace where the footage was taken. This wind that besides making the relief questionable. Because it is clear that the instrument, however heavy, was subject to oscillations. But the human factor is also to be kept in mind, that is, the eye that is watching with the wind. Obviously, it decreased performance over time, plus the time required. On the basis of these reference points, the collage of refunds was made. Note that, in essence, for each pair of slabs, all the segments of the bricks have been retraced. And since they were rusticated, there was a double line. And this took a long time. In short, one fell into the trap of precision. If you think, for a moment, that they did not make the return on glossy paper. But we tried to use a transparent plastic support, on which there was a second layer of orange plastic, which was scratched by a sapphire tip tied to the pantograph. Apart from the costs of this material, because it had to be inextensible. When then the copies of the works were made on heliography, which means that all the great precision went to be blessed.